Coffee Metal Podcast, episode 20.
Greetings, everyone. Today on the show, I have author and podcaster BRIAN LETENDRE. When I first started planning this podcast, and yes, it is planned, albeit poorly, but still planned, BRIAN was one of the very first people I wanted to have on. And though it's taken a shamefully long amount of time for me to actually ask BRIAN to come on, I'm incredibly glad he said yes, and we got the opportunity to chat. As much as I enjoyed his now retired podcast Secret Identity and his novel writing, especially his slasher homage book HARROWED, BRIAN's podcast Thrash It Out with fellow writer Anthony Johnston was very instrumental in not only reigniting my passion for listening to new types of metal and rock, and it also kickstarted me making music again, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. BRIAN is a stellar podcaster, author, and human. I hope you enjoy our talk as much as I did. Let's get to it. All right, BRIAN, so I've listened to a lot of your podcasts between Power Chords, your current rock and metal podcast that you do with Matt Herring, to Thrash It Out with Anthony Johnson, which is probably my favorite or second favorite podcast, period. And then before that, you had Secret Identity that you ran for many, many, many years. And you literally wrote the book on podcasting. And so I was really glad when you agreed to come on, and we've been kind of buddies for a few years now, thanks to Thrash It Out. And you guys started a great community there and the Facebook page, and I'm stoked. Facebook's kind of can be really fun with the groups and stuff, or it can be a hellscape of why is this person part of my family? But
yes, it can be those. It's both.
But Thrash It Out has been escape. I will admit I don't listen to Power Chords as much as I should, but that's because when a new.
Well, there's only so many hours. Yeah,
there's only, and I'm not sitting at a desk. If I was sitting at a desk working a full-time job like I used to, 1,000%, I probably would have went back and went through all your Secret Identities that I missed too before I even knew you. That's just, you know how to make a good podcast.
Well, thank you.
And, I'd asked you hey, am I doing okay? And you said some really nice things, and I really appreciate that. And I took those to heart. And again,
they were all true.
They were all true. And the check's in the mail.
Oh, thank you.
And regarding Power Chords.
Couldn't come at a better time.
And regarding Power Chords, I'm also honored that, you asked me to do the podcast art for it. And it's one of the favorite things I've ever drawn.
Oh, dude, we should talk about that, because I don't know if people, and thank you for, having me on. We've talked about it before, and I love, obviously, the theme of the show, 3 things that are very near and dear to my heart, of course.
There are 3 things most important to me besides my family. So,
there you go. And that's usually when I talk to people about podcasts, because I just love podcasts, and I love podcasting, and I love the process of the podcast and all that kind of stuff. And so, but that's usually one of the first things, right? Is what are you super passionate about that you're going to, make the core of whatever this show is that you want to create. And you just nailed it. And so, but the Power Chords podcast show art is so perfectly captured. I knew exactly what I wanted that to look like. Because Power Chords is very much, as opposed to Thrash It Out. Thrash It Out is a show that is, and we can certainly talk more about that, but it's a show that tends to focus on heavier metal. Yes. And Power Chords, where the Venn diagram of Matt and I's interests when it comes to music are sort of overlap, is in the 80s hair metal sort of genre. And he that's a sweet spot for us, and he goes in the other direction, and I tend to go heavier from that. And so so we just kind of wanted to capture the days of when you used to put grocery bags as book covers. Yes. And put band logos on them and stuff like that, and you killed it. It's exactly what I wanted it to be. And it's one of my favorite things about Power Chords.
When I was coloring it, I was so excited. I'm like, oh, I have a ballpoint pen brush this is perfect. So, so I'm
Oh,
like,
it was
okay,
100%
I'm
perfect.
just like, I remember very distinctly, I'm coloring it and I just got this big shitting grin on my face. And my wife's like, what are you smiling about? I'm like, I just, this captures just like, and you had some great direction with that. And I was really stoked to, be able to do that. Um,
Well, and I'm old, so I was a child of the 80s, and that was, I mean, that was my desk, and that was my,
mhm.
books and stuff like
Well,
that, and so
you
it
know,
was perfect.
it in the mid '90s, which was my time in high school, it wasn't so much that there was a lot of notebook sketching and stuff like that, but a lot of it was whiteout because you had the whiteout pens, so it was the
Uh-huh.
whiteout pens on the book bags, and I made some pretty decent scratch because I could draw the 311 logo,
Oh, okay. Yep.
and they were pretty big around that time, and even people were like, I don't like the band, but I like the logo, and they would pay me like a few bucks to like do it between classes or something on their thing, and I'm like, all right, cool, I guess and we had open lunch, so I'm like, yeah, I guess I'm going to McDonald's today, like,
Yeah. Well, the
um,
ones that I was never, I am not very artistically gifted, and I never put the work into like actually become a decent artist, but I could draw some pretty decent band logos. All my favorite bands I could draw. So I could draw Megadeth, I could draw AC/DC, Suicidal Tendencies, and Twisted Sister, of course, has one of the great logos of all time. So yeah, my book covers were definitely covered
well,
with all of that stuff.
typography is its own special art form, and I heavily respect people who can do that. So
Yeah, I don't know if I'd be able to draw. I could still break out the Twisted Sister logo for sure, but and probably AC/DC.
yeah, yeah, those are probably the I don't know. I'd probably screw up the ACDs. I'm terrible at. Also, I'm also terrible at typography. So the fact that the Power Chords one came out as good as it did, I was just like, oh man, yes.
Came out perfect, man.
um.
Absolutely perfect.
So, before we get too far, I gotta ask the questions. Comics, coffee, metal. What are you into these days?
So, comics is interesting. I guess what I'm into these days for comics is I ended up subscribing to the DC Universe app. So I'm one of the 7 people that is currently subscribed to that app. And I'm just waiting for the day where they're going to be like, yeah, that's canceled now. That's totally canceled. But I am starting to go back and dig into stuff that, and then people will be like, oh, that's horrible. Why are you reading that? But I'm like digging back into some of the Rebirth stuff and
Okay.
kind of going back. And my biggest complaint about the DC Universe app is the user interface is god awful.
Mm.
Especially when you're used to like Comixology has a much better interface and stuff, but there's good stuff there. I mean, it's a pretty decent deal, especially because you have access to so many back issues of comics.
Yeah.
And when we stopped doing Secret Identity, which was 2017, late
Something like that. Yeah.
2017, I think it was. I kind of took a big step back from like reading regularly.
Okay.
And so the last of like the buying comics every week thing was really when Dan Slott ended his run on Amazing Spider-Man. And so that was kind of when I disengaged from like the buying the regular comics. But I would say like, so I'm digging into some of that old DC stuff. My absolute favorite series of the past several years is Giant Days. I adore Giant Days and from Boom, and so that I push that on people at work. Like we have a book club at work, and I made people read the first volume of Giant Days, and they freaking loved it. Like myself and a couple of my fellow coworkers actually cosplayed as the characters from Giant Days for Halloween, and we were the only people in the office who knew who those characters were, but it was great. So I love Giant Days. Digging back into some of the DC stuff, and that's mainly. It's funny. It's going to sound like a plug for Anthony, but I have actually had a hankering the past week or so to go and start reading Wasteland from the beginning over again because I really, really like Wasteland. But yeah, as far as like mainstream, like pick it up every week, every couple of weeks stuff, I'm not really into any of the current stuff right now. Although I am Valkyrie, I'm very interested in because because Torun, who is a Thrash It Out community member and listener, she's on that book, and it's been getting great reviews. And so I'm going to grab the 10 issues of that are out right now and get in that. And then I'm always sort of on the edge of jumping back in. But the problem was I was spending so much money when we were doing Secret Identity on a weekly basis that it was almost like when I quit golfing. Like, it's such an expensive hobby that, like, when I stopped doing it, it was like, man,
I don't know if I can really
go back. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I can go back and spend that money to that degree again.
Yeah, I stopped buying regularly when my daughter was born about just over 4 years ago, because I ended up, being stay at home, and then I wasn't near the comic shop in Chicago where I went to, Challengers Comics in Chicago, located in the Bucktown area. Free plug for them because they're the greatest. And they, so yeah, I just had to kind of like stop cold turkey almost. I mean, I didn't like stop going. Like I gave them heads up, like, hey, stop my pools.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, so since then it's just been, occasional trades here, picking up books or whatever, my friends send me, or their PDFs of their stuff and things like that. So I'm not familiar with Giant Days. I've heard the name thrown around, but yeah, it's and also since it
perfectly captures the sort of slice of life college experience in such a like charming way. It's really I'd be shocked if you pick up the first volume of Giant Days and you don't adore it. I will pay for it. I may just actually buy it for you.
Let me check to see if it's on Comixology Unlimited first, because I am currently.
Oh, you know what? I bet the first volume probably is.
I'm currently on I'm on the free trial for that at the moment. Thanks, pandemic. But yeah, so I'll definitely check that out, because and also since now that I got an iPad Pro, like reading comics digitally is like, this is great.
Yeah, totally.
Like I went through and I reread all of Irredeemable.
Oh yes.
And I have most of the trades, but I'm like, this looks great. I'm just gonna. It was free on the Comixology app, and I'm like, I'm just gonna read it here because I never finished it, and I'll tell
you what, man. Boom put out some really good books.
Yes, they did. They did.
And yeah.
So that's So I'll definitely check out Giant Days, because I'm always looking for something. Like, I've got the first few volumes of Paper Girls that I need to catch up on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've heard Giant Days. I just wasn't sure what it was. And again, it's that thing where when you're making the thing, you don't have the time to enjoy the things.
I hear that.
So, so it's like, I have a half hour. Do I ink this panel or do I read some comics? And usually it just ends up.
For me, it's now it's just trying to cram in just reading time in general.
Yeah.
Like, and it's always before I go to bed at night that I'm trying to cram in my reading for the day. But yeah, so but more recently, going back through the DC Universe app and kind of digging into some of the storylines that I either had started to read and I fell off of, or I just didn't get a chance to read, and now I can kind of go back and catch up on some of that stuff. And so, which is cool, because I don't want to say like I was a Marvel guy, but I predominantly, of the big two books that I picked up, more often was Marvel stuff.
Same.
Although towards the end of my sort of week-to-week reading, I had fallen off of a lot of that stuff. Spider-Man was always I grew up a Spider-Man fan. Spider-Man was always my favorite, so I was always reading some Spider-Man book. And Dan Slott's run, for me, is my favorite Spider-Man run of all time. I absolutely adore his entire run. Superior Spider-Man, what he did with Dr. Octopus, amazing.
Yes.
So good. And so yeah, that was my favorite for years and years and years. And I would say that and Giant Days, if I had to name, like, off the top of my head, like, two of my favorite comics. And then of course Wasteland, as I just mentioned, because I was going to dig back into that. And another great series that Anthony was doing, it was Umbral,
Yes, with Chris
And it
Mitten. Oh,
unfortunately
so
didn't
good.
get very far, but that like was right in my D&D wheelhouse.
That
So
was
that was
so
really
underrated.
good too.
So underrated. I really wish they'd get a chance to make more of that. It's such. I think if it came out now, it probably would have a better chance. I think people are
I
more
think so
open.
too. But you never, and that's the thing. I mean, right, for a book to hit, and
It's
find that audience, and like so many things have to
yeah,
happen.
it's hard enough to make a good comic book, even if you
Total,
have great people
100%,
involved.
dude. Yes,
Just
and
to make
so,
sure,
but
yeah, it gets released at the right time for the public to be like, yes, this is what we want. Like,
right, it really is like so many things have to go right for a book to hit. But yeah, and then I just have like my comic collection in the basement as we've been, cleaning up the house. We just did like a big cleanup of the basement and stuff like that. And I'm starting to think about like, okay, should I really go through my entire collection and start to purge like the stuff that I don't need to keep forever? And then, my one complete collection is I have all of the 2099 books from the 90s, all of
oh,
them.
I loved X-Men 99 so
Um,
much.
I have all of them. I have all the X-Men. I have everything.
Nice.
I have all the Spideys, all the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, Doom, Ravage, like all of the. I have the whole from start to finish, every
I
book.
always get
And
bummed when they've tried rebooting the 2099 stuff a couple times.
well,
And
they did, and the one that was awful. Sorry to the creative team on that, but was Time Storm was so disappointing for me as someone who was dying for that
yeah.
universe to come back.
Well,
Time Storm was like so disappointing.
people, it's just like those books were great, and I don't know the story of why they canceled them. I don't know if it was coming at the Marvel bankruptcy thing and they were not hitting that huge threshold that books had in the 90s for sales, but they were great books.
Oh, dude,
And
they were so awesome. They were so they're just great, like cyberpunk.
yeah, the X-Men,
Comics,
like the
and
X-Men 2099 run is one of my
totally, dude.
favorite books of all time. Like,
And the thing, like now, and when Peter David was writing Spider-Man 2099, a few years ago and stuff, there was I enjoyed those books. I enjoyed them bringing Miguel back and having him be in the Marvel universe and stuff like that.
and from what I've read of the newer stuff with Miguel, it's good. Like he's
Definitely. Like the Time Storm thing was its own entity, and that was not good. And then the Spider-Man 2099 stuff that came back was better. And it just but what it lacks to me is it lacks the vibe
yeah.
of the original stuff. And I think it's just because they brought him into the main MCU and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But I really, really love that old universe of 2099. And but I don't know. It's almost like a time in a bottle sort of thing. I don't know that you even could bring it back today in the same way and have it resonate, because just being out at that time and like the vision of the future, the whole cyberpunk thing, like it all worked really, really well.
Well, I think people are really stoked about this cyberpunk video game.
Oh, for sure. Well, I was actually just going to say that is like, if anything could really kick off a huge wave of like cyberpunk nostalgia, I think it could be this game from CD Projekt Red, Cyberpunk. It's going to be huge when it comes out, and I could totally see that, sort of kicking off that that wave of nostalgia for it. But man, that's my claim to fame as far as comic goes, is I have all of the 2099 comics, and that is something that if I ever get rid of some of my collection will absolutely be in the I'm keeping these forever collection.
Yeah.
And I actually have it's not in here now, it must be downstairs. Oh, it is downstairs. I have a signed Spider-Man 2099 poster.
Cool.
That I've actually met Peter David for the first time at this tiny little convention here in Springfield, Massachusetts, and got my poster signed.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting Peter David think it was Wizard World. The first big convention I went to was Wizard World, like 2008, and quote unquote big convention because this is before it was depressing in terms of like there's no big companies there. I'm walking down the aisles, it's like almost empty, and I'm like, wait, that's Peter David, and there's no one in the line or anything like that, and I'm like, holy shit, like and I saw he was gonna be a guest, and I'm like, I'm not gonna bring anything because this is gonna be a line. I'm not gonna wait too long, I'm just trying to have some fun. I'm like, well, I don't have anything, but luckily he had some copies of the Hulk the End on there.
Oh, that's a good one. Yep.
So I'm like, you know what? I've been wanting to get that. Let's go do that. And he was very nice and just like, I'm glad I got to meet at least one. There's another time the same thing happened. I think it was at a C2E2, and George Perez was just sitting there and no one was around him.
Yep.
It was.
I have a great picture with George Perez.
And
He's
I'm like,
super nice.
And it was definitely a fluke because that's never really the case. But I was like running around, and then I didn't realize it until I was like 3 or 4 rows down. I'm like, wait, that wasn't his. That wasn't like the guy on his table, sitting. That was him. Like, oh
right.
shit. But and I've had no such luck yet with any other bigger names. But now that I'm actually working conventions behind the table, it's all I can do just to like run out and say hi to everybody I know and then run back.
Sure.
So
well, and for me, like it's funny because like meeting Peter David, and he was super nice when I met him, and we had a good conversation about Spidey 2099 and stuff like that. And then I met Rick Leonardi at a show, and this was like later on in the Secret Identity, sort of lifespan. And so this was after like hundreds and hundreds of interviews with creators and stuff like that. I was so like starstruck talking to Rick Leonardi about Spider-Man 2099 that I think my voice cracked, and I just kind of like completely embarrassed myself.
Total Chris Farley moment. Remember when you drew that when he was in like jumping? Dude, like, that was cool.
100%. And I wasn't usually someone who would get like starstruck by people, but the character itself meant so much to me that I was like, I really like Spider-Man 2099. Like, you don't even know what a big fan I am. Yeah, it was not one of my best moments.
That's got to be the moment when you're starstruck, when you're talking to someone, you're like, listen, man, you don't even know how big of a fan. Like, you just don't know how big of a fan. Because I've definitely had moments like that where I've almost said that, but I was too nervous to even say that.
That was my one time where I was like totally, and then another time, maybe the second time was when I was talking to Larry Hama about G.I. Joe.
Oh, man.
That was another time that I was like totally...
I would definitely just be like, hi, Mr. Hama, I'd like the...
Yes, because I was a total G.I. Joe kid growing up.
His Wolverine is like my Wolverine, like...
Yeah, like so, but like those, but so a lot of my, stories around comics and my love for comics and stuff are very grounded in like the times that I kind of came in and out of it. So I grew up reading comics, and then I stopped for years, and then when I was in college is when I got into the 2099 universe and like devoured it and bought and it spent years on eBay afterwards, like making sure that I had every variant cover and every single book from the collection and stuff like that. And then of course G.I. Joe. So that was like, as Secret Identity went on, it was like, okay, can I actually meet and like interview and talk to all the people who made my favorite, books and stuff kind of growing up. And so for the most part, I mean, I was able to get through a lot of that list over the time that we did that. But and those are some of the most fond memories. Like when the news of Denny O'Neil passing just came up, it made me remember a panel that we did at Connecticut Comic-Con. Like it was either 2014 or 2015, but it was him and Danny Fingeroth and I was moderating this panel about writing comics, and just to have the two of them just kind of sharing ideas and anecdotes and things like that. And, Denny talking about what it meant to be a professional writer. And, it was just a great memory to go back and I forget that sometimes about the Secret Identity stuff, is that there were so many different people that we interviewed for the show and so many different conventions that we went to, and we were always in New York, and there's just so much that we did over the like 12 years that show went on, that it's just wild to think about sometimes. And then every once in a while something will happen, or unfortunately a creator passes like Denny O'Neil did, and then it just brings you back to like, oh man, yeah, I remember that when we did this and this person was here. And so great, I have great memories of that. That's so my awesome. Affinity for comics isn't even so much now as a reader anymore as it is just for some of those great conversations with creators over the years and things like that. But I will always love comics, and my kids grew up on comics, and I'll always have my 2099 collection.
I think
no matter what I'm reading.
I think a lot of us, it can be kind of like a cyclical thing where it's like we'll be all about it, and then things happen, you fall away, but then there'll be that one series that brings you back in a bit, and then the next one, and then the next one. Next thing you know, you got a pull box again, and you're going every week, or you're at least keeping your eyes open for these graphic novels, because honestly, I don't think I'd buy single comics again anymore. I think I would just go digital or graphic novels. And but that, for me, that's just like a space issue more than a preference, because
same here. I have no space in my house.
I miss the feeling of like having the little plastic baggie, sitting down, pulling them all out, the receipt falls out, it still smells like the comic shop. Like, you sit down and you decide which one you want to read first. The one you're most excited about, you put that one on the bottom because you want to savor the fuck out of that one.
Always. Yep.
So there's the ritual of it that I definitely miss.
I do too. It was nice to, go to the shop and pick up your books for that week, and, run into a couple of people at the store and have a nice conversation and stuff like that. And then, when we were doing the show, it was like what was our homework for the week? What were the books that we were going to come back and talk about each week and stuff like that. And so I do miss that. But I also feel like if I was still buying those comics on a weekly basis and reading like that, then I'd be wanting to do a comic podcast at the same time as well. And I think when we wrapped up Secret Identity, we kind of had felt like it had run its course, like we had done 800 episodes. Well, actually, we had done over 1,000 episodes,
astounding.
But there was 800 officially sort of numbered episodes, and then we had like so many podcasting mistakes back in the day. When Marvel went to the 0.5 numbering, we actually numbered our episodes by 0.5s for a period of time. So there's this whole run of Secret Identity episodes where it was like Secret Identity 24, 24.5, and so that's why we don't have over 1,000 episodes like officially numbered, is because then we did when Marvel did their all new initiative, we did all new Secret Identity, and so like we would kind of reinvent it every so often, but then we'd go back to the original numbering and stuff like that. And so we have, I bet, 1,000 shows, but officially ended on 800, and I think it's over 2,000 hours of
that's crazy
of audio at that point. And a lot of that stuff isn't even out there anymore, because we, when we first started podcasting, the podcast hosts that we had, like you only had so much storage and stuff like that. So I'm eventually going to get them all back up online again, so people can dig into it, mostly for the interviews, because I think, and I've actually thought about going through and combing through and cutting out the interviews and then just kind of reposting a lot of that stuff, because there is some really great moments and interviews and conversations and stuff like that, which is honestly the whole reason I got into podcasting in the first place, is because I'm a process nerd, and I love to talk to people about how they do the thing that they do.
And that's the great thing about the interviews and stuff like that. It's pretty timeless. Even if they're talking about a specific project, you get into those nitty-gritty details that are just entertaining and just enthralling, because there's a good chance if you're a comic nerd, you're also a process nerd. There's so many, like, if YouTube has taught me anything, everyone's a process nerd in some way. Is it a makeup tutorial because you're looking at the makeup process and all that? Or we're all interested it's a basic human thing. I think we're just like, I like that thing. How did they do that thing? And
well, and my brain is very kind of like puzzle oriented.
Mhm.
So I always think about like, how do these things fit together and come together? And comics is such a great puzzle
it's never the same way twice.
because of the different elements, right? And just how all of that kind of fits together is really something that is very magical about comics. And so yeah, it's just a great medium.
Awesome.
And yeah, but so I answered the first question. I answered comics.
Yes, coffee. What you drinking? What's your poison?
Whatever the cheapest
Whatever is on sale
coffee
at the grocery store.
Literally, if it's Hills Brothers, if it's Folgers, if it is, I am a garbage coffee drinker. I will drink the coffee from the corner gas station that is brewed at 5 a.m. and
Burnt
there's
black
still
water.
like a cup left. Yep, there's still a cup left at like 8:30 when I roll in there. I'll grab that. And I think, I don't know. My first job was working at a hockey rink, and we had really bad coffee there, and so I think that may have set me on the path of drinking bad coffee for the rest of my life.
I kind of wish I could just do that. I'd save a lot of money.
Yeah, like I have no I can't stand like Starbucks. Like I can't even really drink it. Like and I'm an East Coaster, so Dunkin' Donuts is the big franchise up here. But yeah, I'll drink anything, and the cheaper the better.
And in the Midwest, it's, there's plenty of Starbucks, but more often than not, or Dunkin' Donuts usually does it for everybody.
Yeah,
I'm not really a huge fan of like this straight Starbucks coffee. Like, if there's one drink that I'm like, oh, if you could drink this every day and not have to worry about the health aspects of it, it would be, chai lattes. Like, that would be just what I drink.
Sure.
But, that's, essentially like drinking a candy bar. So,
right.
So,
Yes.
Coffee it is. But, I tend to like basically, anything that's just, I think the most like mid-tier, anything that's like from like on sale from like $5 to like $8 a bag, like that kind of mid-level.
Yeah,
kind of
that's
stuff.
too highfalutin for me. Like I'm living strictly in the
You got the 55-gallon drum of like Maxwell House that you got from Costco.
Whatever the deal of the week is. Oh, Maxwell House, that's
for like $9.99
high-grade coffee for me. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's whatever is on sale is what I get. But then so Dunkin' Donuts for me is like a treat.
Okay.
That's like I'm really taking care of myself today because I'm going to Dunkin' Donuts.
Are you a straight black coffee or are you cream sugar?
I go between because I try to do an overall low carb diet, so I don't put sugar or anything in it. And so, but when I do put anything, so my morning coffee, drink black, but if I do put any cream in it, it's like a sugar-free creamer, sort of thing. It's super boring, but
not to me.
I think it's a coffee mate
know.
one that actually is it's like an Italian cream or something,
Okay.
but it's like sugar-free or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, I'm typically, I was, when I first started drinking coffee, I was literally like 4 spoons of sugar, tons of creamer, and then thankfully not anymore. I have a little bit of sugar for like my first cup, and then if I have subsequent cups, I just omit the sugar, but I still do some milk or creamer or something. Just to, I tried black coffee a lot. Like I wish I was a black coffee drinker. It would just make things a lot easier.
Yeah.
But
well, and you tend to drink it slower too.
Yeah.
Like the more candy items that you have in the coffee, the faster the coffee's gonna.
Well, also, and my wife, she can drink black coffee, but I think the trick is if like you're eating your breakfast and you're also drinking the like black coffee, like that kind of works a lot better than just sitting there and drinking it plain black for some people. So, but that's fine. But again, I wish I could do the garbage coffee, not to disparage your coffee. I wish I could do the cheap
Oh no,
coffee.
you can disparage it. I wear that proudly. I'm a garbage coffee drinker.
I really wish I could just go to the discount grocery store, just grab whatever can they have. It'd save me a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, my family, I have a teenage daughter who's all Starbucks all the time, and my wife is a big Starbucks fan as well. So they're not down here with me enjoying the
it's
the
all
trash
yours.
coffee.
It's all for Brian.
Yeah, which is right. It's more for me.
So
it's absolutely right.
Well, and I guess next up is something you don't talk about enough, and that's some good old metal.
That's because you can't talk about metal enough. There is no, and that's the funny thing, is because when we started Secret Identity, when we started the comic book podcast, like, I was a fan of comics, but it was more that we were going to do kind of a geek culture thing, and it actually became more of focus primarily on comics, maybe some like Saturday morning cartoon kind of stuff. But as much as I love comics, like, music is everything. I would say for me, it's music, it's horror, and then comics. And so for me, when we decided to wrap up Secret Identity, Anthony and I were already doing Thrash It Out at that point. And so for Matt and I was like, well, are we going to do a show anymore, or is this it? And, we kind of quickly decided, like, we could totally do a show about music. And I was like, I'll do 1,000 shows about music. That's like, you don't have to twist my arm. I will totally talk about music. Because that is the one constant in my everyday life, is I listen to music all the time. And so, yeah, I love it. I love doing Thrash It Out. It's a great joy to do that show with Anthony. And a lot of it's because of the amazing community that we have. You mentioned Facebook, and that is literally the only reason that I keep Facebook, is because our Thrash It Out community is on Facebook, and it's awesome. It's such a great community. It's exactly the type of hanging out at the music store group of people that that you would want to have music conversations with. So it's
pretty
great.
Yeah, it's pretty astounding that we can have people who can post they're excited about this thing from Rat or from some other hair metal band,
and that's usually me, right? That's like,
and then there is extremely little to know, like, oh, these guys suck or whatever. Actually, I don't think
you had, yeah.
And granted, those types of people don't last very long in the group anyway. But
that's it.
Because it's there's I've talked about this in the show before. It's like metal is not even just like its own genre. It's its own medium.
It is 100%, dude.
And I know your answer to this, and this is also something I've kind of brought up to some people earlier episodes of the show. Like, I think everyone kind of starts in the Venn diagram of metal. I think more often than not, they start with one of the big four. Whether they stick with them and move on as like their main, that's obviously different. But I think when, people first start listening to metal, I think one of the big four is typically the launching point for them. And by the big four, I mean Slayer, Megadeth, Metallica, Anthrax.
Sure.
And we can debate endlessly about who else might deserve a place among that pantheon in terms of just general ability or I guess legendary status or influence and things like that. But I know for you, like, the top of the heap is Megadeth.
For sure, hands down. But interestingly, like, my journey into, it was really AC/DC that got me into, it was probably AC/DC and Def Leppard, Twisted Sister. Like, those are my early sort of, hard rock pushing into what was metal at the time. But as far as the big four, it was definitely Megadeth. Now, granted, I was listening to a lot of Metallica at that time as well. But for me, Megadeth, and I've always loved, they used to have a tagline back in the day, the world's state-of-the-art speed metal band. That was like the tag. I had a poster on my wall that said that. And that was what set them apart for me. There was a level of technicality that I felt like they possessed that the other three bands just didn't have in the same way. And for me, that just clicked. And so I was a diehard Megadeth fan. And then, of course, once you become, once you're firmly in your teenage years and you know that, the history of like Megadeth and Metallica and stuff like that,
you have to make your choice.
you have to make a choice, and then you have a chip on your shoulder about that. And I've always been a fan of the underdog. Like I always, that just, I don't know if that's what I gravitate towards, or if that's always, whether it's my sports teams or whether it's, whatever, it's always the underdog. And so I think that also really resonated with me when it came to Megadeth. And so, yeah, for the big four, they are and will always be. I mean, they're my favorite metal band for sure. And I was just posting in our Thrash It Out group that the Mustaine was basically saying that they had 18 songs for their next album. Now, will it come out with 18 songs? I don't know. But 18 new Megadeth songs, very exciting to me. Like, I am very much looking forward to the next album.
Yeah, this is a bit of a sidetrack, but to be honest, like I think when bands come out with like 18-track albums these days, I'm like, you didn't need to do that.
No.
Like,
well,
give us 10.
A good example,
give us 10
totally.
of your best. And not to say that, those other 8 couldn't have been good, but like you're presenting an experience that is just going to be kind of
look no further
exhausting.
than Metallica's most recent album, right? Where if you had cut a 1-hour album out of the music that compiled that 2-disc set, you would have had maybe one of the best Metallica albums that they had done, most definitely in the modern era.
Yeah. Well, it's probably their best, in the 2000s for sure.
Yeah, and the problem is that they don't, it's kind of like Stephen King, right? Like there's no real editor there anymore, and so it's like there's no one to say, man, maybe dial that back a little bit. Like maybe it's like you said, do you really need to do that? And but at the same time, like much like Stephen King and much like Metallica, like they've earned it. If they want to write 20-minute long songs and they want to put out double albums, they want to do that. And similarly with Megadeth, like who am I to say to Dave Mustaine, like don't put out an 18-song album? But you're right, it's rare that an effort that big actually from top to bottom delivers.
It's I think if you take the last 2 Metallica albums, Death Magnetic and Hardwired, and actually I think you can even go further and like you can make both of those, like trim those down, you can make one hell of an album.
For sure. And I like Death Magnetic.
No, and I've never not liked a Metallica release, even Saint Anger. And actually a funny thing is the pilot episode of Thrash It Out was you going on Anthony's podcast Unjustly Maligned and talking about Megadeth's Risk. And I loved that,
which I was so happy to do.
I loved that episode so much because I'm not a Megadeth guy, but one of the things that I can enjoy is when people are talking about something they're passionate about. So that's when, I first heard you talking about music and stuff like that. So I'm like, okay, I don't like Megadeth all that much, but this is making me want to go listen to that album. And so when I was done listening to that, I tweeted at Anthony like, hey, listen, man, I'm like a nobody. You don't know me, aside from like a few exchanges. But like, if you ever want to do Unjustly Maligned on like Saint Anger, I'm like there. And he's like, he's basically said like, haha, just you might be happy with what's coming next or something like that. So, and then like a week later, you guys dropped Thrash It Out. And it was the first episode.
Well, what
with
was
Saint
so
Anger.
funny about that? Yeah, and you know this story because you listened to the show, but it was that was a standalone thing when and I loved Unjustly Maligned. I loved the whole.
I missed that
premise
podcast
of it.
so much. It was
totally, dude.
Like, I don't care about board games, but when people are talking about a board game that people,
100%.
I'm like, I'm enthralled. Like, it's just,
Yeah.
Anthony had a really great concept and a really great premise there, and I'm glad he's been having so many other successes everywhere else that he doesn't have time to do it. I just wish he had time to do it.
But for anyone that had not listened to that show, basically the premise was that he would invite people to come on and talk about something that they loved, but everybody else pretty much thought sucked.
Mm-hmm.
And so they felt it was unjustly maligned. And so I picked an album of Megadeth that most people, even today, say it's their worst album, but I strongly disagree. If you've listened to Super Collider, it is a far inferior album to Risk for sure. But when we did that episode, the feedback that he got was really positive on it, and people had such a good reaction to it that he had reached out and said, "What do you think about us doing more of this?" And then so that ended up being the backdoor pilot for Thrash It Out that we had no intention of it being when we recorded that episode. And of course, now I think we've been doing Thrash It Out for like 5 years, and it's awesome. It is, like I said, it is pure joy to do that show.
It is.
I mean, it's
I love it. I love the fact like episodes are like over 2 hours because well, you guys could, because, and I love the fact that more often than not, there's like an hour of you guys just chatting about stuff and updating like stuff we talked about in the group and all that for like the first hour. And then it's like, oh, I guess we better get to the album. and then then there's the album. And it's exposed me to a lot of stuff that
me too.
I have not been, would not have enjoyed, would not have liked. And it's just a really entertaining podcast. It's one of those things where it's like anyone I know who likes metal, and podcasts or anything like that, I'm like, listen to this. Go to Facebook, join the group. It's a cool group. No one's being a dick in there. Everyone's cool. Basically, if you post something and it's not someone's cup of tea, the crowd there, they're just not, no one's gonna, and if there are people who start doing that, it's shut down very fast. It's
self-policing, which is really nice, is that people will be like, hey man, that's not what we're kind of about here. But yeah, first of all, thank you for spreading the word about that. I feel like we've gotten such a good community and such great listeners who give us such great feedback.
I think a lot of us feel like an ownership with the show, just because metal is something that people are very passionate about, and it's nice to have such an excellent representation of like how we feel and how we think and how we process this genre of music that we love, that's just so varied and complicated and sometimes ridiculous and sometimes complex and beautiful, and it's just, or just like really dark and raw, and it's just like, it's nice to have you guys being so open about we're doing a death metal album, but then you can easily go back and you guys did was it High and Dry from Def Leppard?
Heck yeah. Def Leppard's best album, one of the best albums of all time.
So it's or like most recently you did I'm
was it Creator? Is that the Creator one?
Was it Death Gripper or something?
Oh, are you talking about Death Clock?
No, that one hasn't dropped yet, has it? Did I miss that?
No, that's the next one that we're going to be doing.
Which will probably have been dropped if you by the time this comes out. I think. I don't know. But regardless, go to your podcast player, streamer, whatever, type in Thrash It Out, subscribe to that, go to the Patreon, toss these guys $1 a month, get in on the polls, do all that, because it's just really entertaining, really good, and just quality stuff. And when, as is the case right now with me, everybody has a podcast, but they're not all great. So
they do, but man, do I listen to a lot of podcasts though. But I appreciate that, man. And it's it's at the point now where we've done so many different types of metal now and so many different albums, both that Anthony and I are huge fans of, because the sort of premise behind the show, for anybody that hasn't heard it, is that we have one album every episode. We alternate picks. So Anthony will pick the album for one episode. I will pick the album for another episode. We have times during each volume, each kind of season, where the listeners will make suggestions, and then we pick one of those to do an episode on. And then we have kind of a backstage pass where we'll actually bring a listener on and have a conversation about an album that is really sort of important to them. And I have been introduced to a lot of great music through the show, because Anthony and I have there's definitely a Venn diagram there, but we have pretty different tastes in metal as far as like what our bread and butter is. And so there's a lot of the albums that he's brought to the show that I had never listened to, or maybe I listened to once and I kind of didn't get into them. But I love it because I love to dig into an album, and we get to do that on every episode and really, for the weeks beforehand, before we record, like sit with it and listen to it like countless times and really get a feel for it, and then talk about it. And like, that is literally my favorite thing to do. So that times where we record, it's like, okay, I get to download everything I think about this thing that we've been listening to for, last month or something like that. And it's just great. I absolutely love it. And then everybody in the group is constantly like, oh, have you heard of, oh, Brian, you like this kind of music. Have you heard of this band, or have you heard of this band, or have you, and there's been so many bands that I've been turned on to through the show, which is great. Because it's just more stuff. It's just more great music to consume and talk about and stuff like that.
Yeah, and your years of experience podcasting are showing, because I keep talking about things and you're like, well, let's explain this so people would know about it. I mean, I'm just plowing through. But yeah, it's, you've explained it obviously beautifully, because no one should have any questions about what these shows are about. And I really hope the average 20 listeners I have go to and check out this show. It's really.
I remember when we had 10 listeners when we hit 10 downloads on one of our first episodes of Secret Identity, and we were like, who are the 10 people that are listening to this?
I think I know 3. And aside from those 3, I'm like, I don't know who these other people are. Occasionally I do solo episodes, and sometimes those have a decent number, and I'm like, who's listening to this? Like, who's actually listening to me, with my BS going on there? But it's inspired me to do, in some part this show, and also to do my blind spot episodes with, finding a band. Well, it's also going to stretch out to other media, but finding a band that I'm like, I don't know much about them. I've either not listened to much or not listened to anything. Let me listen to everything and see how I feel. Like I did Machine Head a little bit back. I'm getting ready to record my one on the Dio Sabbath era.
Oh, very good.
But all the Dio Sabbath stuff, including the Heaven and Hell album, that's not technically Black Sabbath, but it's Black Sabbath.
It's totally Black Sabbath, yeah.
Not to bury the lead on that, but I think, that one was probably the one that felt best to me. But
it is really good.
There's a lot of great stuff out there that I'm like, and you guys talking about stuff, because you had a Dio episode and things like that. And Dio was never, aside from like Rainbow in the Dark and Holy Diver, I never really had much Dio experience. But that got me thinking, like, well, I should give this guy a shot. Like, his vocals aren't my cup of tea. I can respect the hell out of his power and his ability. It's just that tonality is not normally my cup.
Yep.
But as I've gotten older and I've expanded my things, I'm more open to that kind of stuff. And I'm also also going the other way, where I'm getting more open to like more guttural stuff too. And some of that stuff's more
I've definitely
to me.
kind of widened my horizon too, because Dio is like my favorite. Dio, Bon Scott and Dee Snider are actually my 3 favorite frontmen of all time.
I mean, and
I
you
adore
pick 3
Dio.
guys with just legend voices. Like, it's just, you can't
Yeah.
even if you're not fans of them, you can't say boo about their ability and their talent.
Well, but I was like, in terms of like the musical tastes kind of widening, that has totally happened through the course of us doing Thrash It Out, because I was never a big Cookie Monster vocals guy at all. Like, I just couldn't really get into that, and that's softened a bit. Like, I totally I can enjoy that music now, and there's just a lot of stuff that I wasn't super into before, but I've found like an album, or I've found like a group in this particular genre that I kind of like and gravitate towards. And my thing now is I'm really back into like 90s thrash vibe, and there's some bands out there right now that are crushing it from like that sort of vibe. Havoc's new album 5 is just amazing. It's just perfect. Like, it's definitely, I think, an absolute classic. That's a great one. And man, what was the other one I was just listening to on Bandcamp? I think it's Warbringer.
Sounds familiar.
Their latest album, I'm going to look it up real quick because I don't want to mess it up. And I know it just came out recently. Is amazing too. Just like totally 90s thrash. And it just really hits home. Like, that is my favorite. That's my favorite like era of thrash. And I'm just really digging where it's at right now. Let's see. Let's look it up. It is Warbringer, and the album is Weapons of Tomorrow, and it came out in April.
Okay.
And it is fantastic.
Yeah, despite Metallica being like my number 1 band, I would not say like I'm a total thrash guy. I'm definitely more in the groove. And that's just in general. Like, if there's death metal but it has a groove to it, I'm digging it. If it's thrash and and thrash can have a lot of groove, I'm digging it. Kind of like when I listened to Machine Head for the first time, and I'm like, oh man, these guys, like, I'm pissed at myself. I should have been listening to these guys for like the past 15 years. Mm-hmm. And out of all their albums, only 2 of them I'm not clicking with. Like, that's a pretty good hit rate.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I was in around the early 2000s, I was a huge fan of Black Label Society, and
yes, I was also a huge fan of that. I their later albums.
I think 1919 Eternal was the peak.
Yeah,
and then
it's hard to argue with that.
And then I think he had 3 or 4 albums after that I feel like should have been just one album, because he probably could have. There's songs in there that you can just get rid of, and if you chop them all down, you put those prime cuts, then you'd have another killer BLS album. And then he's got some of the more recent Black Vatican stuff. He's got, like, that's good. But yeah, 1919 Eternal was definitely like the peak of, like.
Yeah, I did like Catacombs of the Black Vatican. That was really good. The Grimmest Hits, that was the most recent one, I was not a big fan of. But 1919 is fantastic. Stronger Than Death, Sonic Brew, all great.
Mm-hmm.
Mafia, I have a soft spot for because James Lomenzo is on that album. And James Lomenzo is my favorite bass player of all time. And so
I'm trying to think if he was the bass player when I saw them in concert.
Ooh, if he was, that would make me very happy. He was the bass player for Megadeth.
Yeah, for a while after Dave Ellefson.
For a while.
Left.
And if there was anyone that was going to come into that band, my favorite band, when Dave Ellefson was not in that band, if I literally had to pick someone, it would have been James Lomenzo. Because I was such a huge fan of his from White Lion, who was a very underrated 80s band that got thrown in with the hair metal genre. But like Vito Bratta and James Lomenzo, like, unfreaking believable. That band was incredible.
If I recall correctly, like they just kind of popped too late. Like they didn't have enough time to build that momentum before grunge hit and just like obliterated. Because I think like them and like Firehouse, I think were around the same time, if I recall correctly.
I literally just saw Firehouse like within the last 12 months. I still go to all those bands, and they still sound great in concert. I actually saw Firehouse and Warrant play together. But yeah, there was they were around a little bit earlier. They definitely had their success with Pride, their debut album, and then Big Game, and then what was the other one? I forget the name of the album, but those 3 albums were really solid albums. But yeah, they didn't hit in the way that I think they deserve to. And then of course, when you had like Firehouse and some of those bands, anyone that came out in the late 80s as it crept towards the 90s was in trouble. Like they were getting in too late. And a lot of that stuff just happened to do with the fact that those bands were around at the same time as a lot of the Motley Crue's in the early days, but they just didn't get their record deal until later in the 80s. And you see the same thing with like the Big Four, right? I mean, part of that problem is that some of the bands that could easily have been in the Big Four, they just didn't have that album out at the right time or something like that, and they kind of missed that window. And that was definitely the case for a ton of 80s bands that came in towards the last few years of the 80s, that they were just on borrowed time because once grunge hit, it just crushed that and changed everything. Like I tell the story a lot about the fact that when I was 17, on my 17th birthday, I went to see Clash of the Titans with Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax, and the opener was Alice in Chains. And this was 1991, I think. Pretty sure it was 91. And it was right before like grunge took over everything. And so Alice in Chains was opening for these 3 bands, and they were like getting booed off the stage. It was like when Man in the Box just came out. And so they're out there and the crowd is not having it because the crowd is there to see Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax. And like within 2 years, the tables would have completely turned, where Alice in Chains was just humongous. And, all of the 80s thrash bands were re-examining their musical styles, at that point. Maybe not Slayer so much, but certainly.
Well, people were like, there's one thing people are always like, oh, well, Slayer never, copped to, the grunge thing or whatever. But they definitely tried, like, towards the end with like the down-tuned newer metal kind of stuff.
Oh, for sure.
They definitely had their missteps. And I came into Metallica in the mid 90s, so like Load and Reload were my entry points. So then,
which was basically my exit from that time. Which, but I mean, amazing, right? Because like your musical fandom, your metal fandom, as far as Metallica goes, is based on this era that for me was like my time that I was done with them. And that's so wild, right? And that's like awesome.
Yeah, and
because like,
and I was lucky enough to like kind of like, I think with Metallica, I think the reason they resonate so much with me is I seem to, whenever they put out an album, it seems to be coming to me at the right time. Like Saint Anger, for all its flaws or whatever, it really encompassed, like the feel of it and all, it really encompassed something at the time that resonated with me. And same thing with Load and Reload, and then going back, Justice and, so on and so forth. It just kind of cemented that, and that was probably in no small part to the fact like that was also like the peak of their powers, right? You had all the videos and all that stuff, and I can't tell you how many times I've like watched a live shit in the year and a half of life of, and I had a neighbor who had all the VHSs of that and stuff, so I was dubbing them and borrowing them and stuff like that. And kind of go back to what you talked about with Lomenzo, I remember when Ellison left, a lot of people were like, oh, Newsted should join. Newsted should join Megadeth. Oh, that'd be the ultimate FU to Metallica, blah, blah, blah. And me, I'm a Newsted fan, like through and through.
Me
And
too.
I'm like,
absolutely.
No. Because even if I'm not a fan of Megadeth, I'm like, that's not the right guy for that. Like, Jason's too big in terms of like personality, I think, for Dave. Because James was such a great compliment. Jason was such a great compliment to James and Kirk. Like, Megadeth, to me, I thought, and I could be wrong because I'm not the fan. I don't know, the details of, what it's like to have Ellison in the band play live and all that. But it kind of feels like Dave's the focus and everyone else, does their thing, but they're kind of more focused.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly guitar is the focus in that band.
Like,
right?
I don't see, I can't
is,
see Jason playing some of these riffs and then like still doing his crazy running around, headbanging stuff, and like without it, like it didn't like the technicality of it, I guess.
I feel like since Ellison's come back to the band, he's had more freedom to be a bigger part of the music. I mean, that's just how I feel about since he's come back. But yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. Like in Megadeth, it's Dave, and then the focus is always on the guitar work. But unlike Metallica, like there's never been a time, to my ear, that Megadeth have taken the bass out of the equation.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like it's not like when like listening to Injustice for All, right? And so so the bass is more present, I think, in consistently in Megadeth stuff. But yeah, like I don't think that Newsted would have been
the right guy,
the guy for that.
No.
I don't know that he would have even enjoyed that. Like I don't know that but who knows? That would have been interesting. But yeah, having Lomenzo in there and just how differently Lomenzo's...
He's straight finger style player, isn't he?
Yes, dude. And I'm telling you, if you listen to United Abominations or Endgame, it's just a different feel. It's just it's Megadeth, and it's definitely all the vibe of Megadeth is still there, but his bass playing is just... I'm glad that it exists within the Megadeth discography, because for those albums, that is one of the things I truly enjoy the most, is listening to Lomenzo. If you listen to his bass line on Washington Is Next, it's incredible. If you listen to his bass line on Head Crusher on Endgame, it's freaking amazing. And there's actually a great video that you can find on YouTube of him, of Lomenzo and Chris Broderick breaking down the end of the Head Crusher song, where Broderick is playing a insane solo, and Lomenzo's bass line is equally just disgusting. Like it's like, and the two of them, like they're doing, it's like for like either like a guitar magazine or some gear company or something like that, and so they're just kind of breaking it down and playing it, and it's so freaking good. And that's another thing that I've always loved about Megadeth, is that they'll consistently bring into the band incredible guitar players. And so Kiko Loureiro, who's their guitar player now, is amazing. Like he's probably the closest to Marty Friedman that they've had since Marty left. With the flair that he brings to the way that he plays. He's just such a great guitar player. But I also loved Broderick and his time in the band, and I got to meet him at a show for Act of Defiance, which is his band that he does. He's actually playing with I forget who he's playing with now. He's playing with a big band right now that's taken him away from this Act of Defiance band. But when he left Megadeth, him and Drover created Act of Defiance, and we saw them in this tiny show, and it was awesome. Got to meet him, talk to him. Super nice guy, incredible guitar player. And that's one of the things I love about Megadeth, is they always have incredibly technical musicians, which is why I cannot wait for the new album to come out, because Dirk Verburen, who is their drummer now,
amazing,
who's been with them for a few years, but he hasn't been on an album yet, but go check that guy's freaking YouTube channel and watch him play some of Gar Samuelson's early Megadeth songs. It's like he's channeling the ghost of Gar Samuelson. Like, he's the closest to Gar that they've had since, Gar was in the band and obviously passed away. So just awesome. Like, Dirk is incredible, and I cannot wait to hear him on the new album. I got to see him, obviously. I got to see Adler when he played with them for a while too, because he was on Dystopia. But yeah, musicianship in Megadeth to me is one of the things that makes them my favorite band. There's just such a high degree of musicianship.
And I looked it up real quick. Chris Broderick is currently in Flames as a live touring member.
That's what it is. And he's been with them for a while now. And so he's been, they haven't really done much with Act of Defiance, which is too bad, because their first album was good. But in the first album, you could almost hear that there were a few songs that Broderick must have been kicking around for potential Megadeth songs that kind of made their way over to that first Act of Defiance album, because they put that first album out pretty quickly after, like within the first year of them forming that band. I think they put the first one out. And then the second album, they kind of solidified their sound, and it's really good. So yeah, I dig Act of Defiance, and they put on a great show. He's an incredible guitar player.
And just to kind of bring that back, it's like, I can always say I appreciate the technicality of Megadeth, and that's definitely, I think, a main factor when they're choosing, when Dave's picking members. And
Yep.
you can contrast that with Metallica, where, as it was painfully laid out for everybody, Rob Trujillo, amazing bass player, but that's not really why they hired him. He was like just the personality. So that's, kind of the difference, I think.
And I think he's been allowed to be himself for the most part in that band, which I think was almost a reaction to what they didn't allow Newsted to do. And so it's been kind of cool to see him, because obviously Infectious Grooves, Suicidal Tendencies, like, he's a ridiculous bass player. He's amazing. And he brings a different energy to Metallica. And I hadn't seen them live. I actually took my son to see them at Gillette Stadium when they came around. They were with the Volbeat. And I hadn't seen Metallica in 25 years. The last time I had seen Metallica in concert was 1989,
Oh, wow.
I think, on the And Justice for All tour, with Queensryche opening for them on the Operation Mindcrime tour, which was an incredible, incredible show. And that, I think, was in Hartford, Connecticut. But I had made the decision that I was going to take my son over a span of a few years to definitely see the Big Four, but also other bands that are just legendary bands that I felt like, even if he's not going to be a metalhead, and he's not a huge metalhead, but he would be able to say that he had seen, all these different bands. I actually, you know how Facebook like shows you pictures that you've taken from 5 years ago or whatever. A picture just came up the other day of my son on the tour bus for Stryper with Oz Fox, the guitar player.
That's awesome.
And he's hanging out with him. But we went to Gillette and to see Metallica, and he was just blown away by the scope of it, because obviously Metallica shows are huge.
Yeah.
And but my favorite part of that show, other than obviously going, with him and having him be able to experience that, was seeing Rob Trujillo live with Metallica, because I've always been a fan of his, and seeing, and one thing about Metallica, they put on a great live show. And the other thing I love about what they do is you can actually buy the live show.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
After you attend it. So that's cool. Like, I really wish that every band did that, because I would buy all of them. Like, I'm kind of blown away that more bands don't do that.
You burn the CD, put the ticket stub on there, keep it.
Dude, 100%. Are you kidding me? I would buy every concert, especially like being old now and like wanting to to be able to actually have the shows that I went to like that, like back in the day, we had bootleg tapes and stuff like that, but I never had like a lot of the shows that I had actually attended. So going to the Metallica one and being able to get that was really cool. But yeah, seeing Rob play in that band was really awesome. And I really liked that they brought him into that band. I thought he just brings a lot of personality to that band, I think.
Awesome. I could just sit here and talk to you about metal all night, but I know I have to let you go and get some rest. But I can't let you go without at least mentioning not only you're a great podcaster and obviously a great lover and speaker about metal, but you're also a great writer. And you have
great. I mean, that's
well, if you announce yourself as great, then that would be a little bit more suspect than me just telling everybody you're great, because
I do.
You have a really great series, the Painted Veil series.
Oh, the Parted Veil.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's like my drive-through horror.
Yeah.
Like a drive-through, like drive-in horror. Like if you like midnight movies or like John Carpenter stories and stuff like
totally
that.
That vibe. Kind of... And the Parted Veil, and you have the it was the King in Yellow, I believe, or the Courting the King in Yellow, yeah. Chasing the King in Yellow, and then was it Lovecraft's Pupil was the next one, or is that?
It was Lovecraft's Curse, and then Lovecraft's Pupil. So they're kind of all related. What it started out as, the first one, Courting the King in Yellow, just started out as kind of a one-off book where it was about... I was always fascinated by the King in Yellow because, everyone knows Lovecraft and like the mythos and stuff like that. But Robert Chambers' The King in Yellow, which came before a lot of that stuff, is such a fascinating book, right? Because it the whole book just alludes to this play that if you kind of read the play, it can drive you insane. And it's almost like, you hear so much about the Necronomicon as like this tome of forbidden knowledge and stuff like that. But the idea of this play, The King in Yellow, being this sort of forbidden thing and this sort of insane thing was always fascinating to me. So that's kind of where I started with that series, was really focusing on The King in Yellow. And then there's a lot of Lovecraft stuff that kind of gets pulled into that as well. And that is a very self-indulgent series for me. It's very much like the type of stuff that it's like kind of like writing the stuff that I would want to read in terms of, like my love of 80s horror movies and stuff like that.
Not to stop you talking about that, but on top of that, you, with a co-writer, Jolene Haley, you have a really good, I guess, imagine a PG-13 slasher movie, but good. And you have that in your novel Harrowed, and then you also have the it's a story afterwards called After the Storm, and I've been waiting for the sequel for Harrowed, like the full on one. I don't know if one's coming. I hope so.
Well, we had it up for a little while, but there was something wrong with the we were selling it through Amazon, and there was something wrong with the formatting of it where we had to take it down.
I thought it was up, and I was looking for it again because I'm trying to read them regular books without them pictures, and I'm like, oh, the other Harold's got to be up, and I couldn't find it. I could have sworn it was up, so that explains that. But that's a really great.
No, we're trying to clean up that, and also working on the third book. It's a 3-story arc basically, but yeah, Harrowed is the series is called The Woodsview Murders, and it is of the stuff that I've written, I feel like that first book with Jolene, Harrowed, is my favorite thing that I've ever worked on, like from a writing standpoint, just because she is such a great person to write with, and our mutual love of like slasher films and just 80s horror in general is like such in 80s music. There's so many nods to 80s rock and metal in that particular book. But yeah, that first story is really one of my favorite things ever. And then After the Storm was kind of like a epilogue for that book that we I had actually written that story for Jolene as a Christmas present after when we first published that. So it was basically like our characters in that story, this sort of additional kind of side story, and then we decided to put it out and have it be something that like everybody could check out. And so then Haunted was the second story in the Woodsby Murders, and that will be going back up at some point, and we're working on the third book now, which is going to be called Hunted.
Okay.
And so that will be that's kind of the finale of this arc with those. But that is super fun because it's a slasher.
And it's really
story.
well done. I'm not a huge fan of, a lot of slasher stuff and all that, just because, I can appreciate cheese to a point, and some of it's just not that great. But, kind of like what Scream did to that genre, like you've kind of done that with the book, in that, not that it's like Scream, but it's taken the idea of a slasher and put a spin on it that's really entertaining and really, really enthralling. And it's not the type of book I would normally read, but I really enjoyed it, and I definitely was like wanting more.
I appreciate that, and if you're a fan of, I am a huge fan of 80s cheese. And
It's not
80s
that I'm
horror.
not. It's just
And-
in general, like I think I'm probably like would appreciate more of like the weird
Well,
gore
I'll share
stuff.
one quick story with you about that before we wrap up. And it's one of my favorite things about Harrowed is that every character in Harrowed and every like location and stuff like that, there's an Easter egg for everything. And so if you're a fan of 80s horror, a lot of that stuff will jump out at you. But the detective from the sort of grizzled old detective from the police department in that story is based on the character that Tom Atkins played in the 80s movie Night of the Creeps, which is one of my all-time favorite.
God.
I actually have the action figure. They did a special, Scream Factory did a special edition. I'm pointing at it like you can see it. Of course, no one can see this. But Scream Factory did a special edition of Night of the Creeps where they had a Ray Cameron action figure. And I have that. And
I
it's
haven't
awesome.
seen that movie
And-
since I was too young to have seen that movie. I'll probably, you know what? Every October, my wife and I are like, let's just put a list of movies that
Oh, put that at the top of it,
and
dude.
we always fail. But, we're gonna do it one day. But
well, because if you saw James Gunn's Slither, that was very much a love letter to Night of the Creeps. That was the one with Nathan Fillion and
yes, and I really enjoyed that.
That came out like early 2000s,
mid
maybe, I don't know.
2000s, I'm gonna say.
Yeah, but Night of the Creeps, all-time classic. And so this character, the character's name in the book is Ray Atkins, which is a combination of Tom Atkins, the actor who plays the character in Night of the Creeps, and Ray Cameron, who is the actual detective in Night of the Creeps. So Ray Atkins is the character in our book. And I had the wonderful opportunity to meet Tom Atkins, who is one of my all-time favorite horror movie actors, and just kind of character actors in general. He was in Escape from New York. He was in Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, which is one of the most unjustly maligned horror movies ever created.
I think it's getting its
he was
due
in The
now.
Fog.
I think a lot of people are coming
I think
back.
it is too, but it was unjustly maligned for many years, and the reaction to it was so strong when it came out that's why they brought Michael Myers. It's basically killed the Halloween franchise when it came out, because Carpenter wanted to do a different theme every year for Halloween and have a different horror story, and that quickly the audiences did not care for that. They were looking for Michael Myers, and so, but I freaking love that movie. So Tom Atkins was at there's a Connecticut Horror Fest, which is this annual show done by horrornews.net, which is a great horror site around here, and awesome people that run that convention. And so he was there, and I got to meet him, and Jolene had printed 2 proof copies of that first book, Harrowed, because it's not in print, it's only in digital. But she had 2 proof copies made because we were thinking about getting it printed and stuff like that, and she had sent them to me as like a birthday present. And so I had 2 copies, and I ended up giving them both away. But one of them I gave to Tom Atkins. So when I was at the show, it was when we were setting up, I was selling books there. And so I saw him getting set up, and I don't like to bother people or anything like that. And I don't even want to approach him, but I was like, I have to go and tell him what a huge like influence he is on my horror stuff. And so I went and talked to him. He was the nicest guy, and I ended up giving him a copy of the book, and he read it.
Wow.
And he actually emailed me to tell me that he enjoyed it.
That's awesome.
And like literally, if nothing else ever happens from a writing standpoint for the rest of my life, that's it, man. Like that was it. And so I got a cool picture of us standing with the book together. I actually had him sign a poster that I then delivered to Jolene when I went out to California and saw her. I brought the poster with me, so she's got a signed poster from Tom Atkins, and it's one of my favorite memories of all time. Also at that show, met Adrienne Barbeau, who was also in The Fog, and she was amazing as well. But yeah, Tom Atkins actually read the book that we had based a character on, a character that he played in, and he enjoyed it. And that was like my favorite writing moment ever.
Well, Brian, I love talking to you. We could talk all night, but to be honest, I don't know how we're going to top like having like one of your heroes enjoy something you wrote that he inspired. I don't think we're going to top that.
No, I don't think we're going to either.
I do want to let everybody know that all these books you've written, including some short story collections, are up on Amazon, Kindle editions, very affordable. I highly recommend it if people are looking for some good reads. I think, even though, we're in lots of places are opening up again and this pandemic is kind of lifting a little bit, I think a lot of us are still going to be needing some content, especially if some of these places don't get their stuff together and things get locked back down. But I highly recommend going to Amazon.com, searching Brian Letendre, Letendre, and checking out some of these books. They're really entertaining. And, as much as I love like Stephen King or something like that, there's not the excessive heft of Stephen King.
No, I mean there's not the talent either, but it's definitely a few thousand notches below Stephen King. But I do.
It's the kind of writing I enjoy the most. Where
I appreciate that.
I'm getting the good characterization. I'm getting plot movement. It's engaging stories, plots, all that. And it's not usually stuff I would read, but I'm glad I decided to take a chance on that stuff because I know you, and I'm really glad I enjoyed it because I love nothing more than enjoying the things my friends make.
Likewise.
That to me is the pinnacle of like, enjoyment of media, because I want nothing but the people I know and respect to succeed. And when they succeed in a creative manner, such, as with your writing or some friends with comics and things like that, I'm just, yes, this is great. I love it. It enriches my life. And I'm just thankful to have, a circle around me of such great creative people. So, and you're part of that, Brian. And, even if it's just,
I appreciate
and I'm including
that.
the podcast in that too, because, podcasting is an art, and, you and Anthony, you guys do it really well. And Matt too. You guys do it really well. And, it's, there's a lot to be said for that. So again, I thank you for coming on. If you want to let everybody know where they can reach you, aside from the Amazon stuff I just pimped out, but they can reach you and, find out more about your stuff, please let us know.
Yeah, I would say the best if you want to see a lot of posts about what music I'm listening to, or posts about old 80s horror movies and stuff like that, Twitter @CBrianWright. Just like C Spot Run, C Brian Wright. And that's my Twitter handle. And that's where you'll find most of my stuff. I did have a blog that I used to keep up with pretty regularly, but I haven't been doing a lot of that lately just because I've had so much else going on. But like I said, Jolene and I are working on the next book in the Woods View series, and we're going to have another series that we're starting up hopefully in the next year as well. So yeah, I appreciate it. I hope people enjoy it. If you're going to pick one out of any of those things, Harrowed is definitely the one. And then I'd probably say Courting the King in Yellow behind that, because that's a standalone story, and you don't need to read any of the other stuff to kind of get that. But I really appreciate you having me on, man. It's been awesome chatting about comics, coffee, and metal. So, like, again, I'm in love with the premise of the show, and feel like it was tailor-made for me. So thank you, sir, for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate your time, man. Thanks again for listening to the Comics Coffee Metal Podcast.